I'm Veronica Marshall at the Capitol, and this week on Senate Spotlight, the new session starts with a tribute for the losses felt by the Senate and the state over the interim.
I believe the finest memorial to Melissa is to embody her spirit and her purpose.
We'll have more on how senators plan to move forward this session. And single entry points and weapons screening stations are now part of the Capitol's security measures.
We really need to focus in on our security here on the complex, not just for the members and the staff, but for the thousands and thousands of visitors who come here every year, including school children.
We'll tell you what else you need to know. Plus,
we shouldn't be in a place in this state or in this country where home ownership is so unattainable that people actually are giving up.
We'll hear about the latest legislative efforts to make homeownership more affordable and attainable. That's all coming up.
Senate Spotlight is produced by the Minnesota Senate and Senate Media Services.
The start of a new session is often met with optimism and anticipation. This year, however, started with feelings of loss. But in response to the loss, one word kept coming up as a guide for the new session. That word was courage. The Senate's 2026 session started with applause. The standing ovation, a sign of solidarity and support for Senator John Hoffman as he officially returned to the Senate floor. Senator Hoffman's arrival in the chamber proved his resolve to represent his district and serve the state, following an attack that left bullets in his body.
I sustained 9 bullet wounds. Those are facts, but they are not what defines us. What defines us is courage.
His experience is one of several tragedies from the interim that are now shaping the session.
There are names now known throughout the state and to the world. Melissa and Mark, Fletcher and Harper, Renee and Alex. We remember today, too, our colleague Bruce.
A tribute for Speaker Emerita Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark became a shared moment of grief and resolve for state leaders.
On June 14th, her bright light was extinguished, along with Mark and Gilbert. That day was the start of what has been the longest summer and the hardest winter. Children killed in a church, Minnesotans killed in the street. And we return here together, altered, some terrorized, fearful, but determined. That's what courage is for.
And events from the interim are also shaping the Capitol itself.
Locked doors, new security systems, the steady presence of an increase in dedicated law enforcement officers now greet us every morning. Yet these physical changes only hint at the deeper shift we all feel as we return.
Despite all of the changes, senators say there are constants to count on this session, including their respect for each other, their commitment to civil discourse, and their hopes for a strong and successful Minnesota.
We will undoubtedly have our share of spirited debates and political clashes in the months ahead, but I am honored to serve with each of you. And I look forward to the session focused on addressing the needs of our home.
In moments like this, politics must fade and humanity must take over. This is not a weakness, it is a strength. Members, let's rise above the noise and let us govern with humility. And let us prove through our actions, not just words, that democracy is stronger than fear.
Meanwhile, a string quartet and therapy dogs were on hand to help senators, Capitol staff, and visitors process the emotional first day. Security around the Capitol has changed, leading to new guidelines for all visitors. I spoke with Senator Bonnie Westlin, a member of the Advisory Committee on Capitol Security, about the latest safety procedures and the new ones on the horizon. Senator, welcome to Senate Spotlight.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here today.
I'm very happy to have you. And we're going to be talking about security at the Capitol today. it's changing. So let's start at the beginning. What facilitated this change? How did we get to where we are?
Sure. Well, I think that we have been seeing an increase in political violence really over the years. A number of things have happened. We've been seeing increased threats against elected officials on all levels of government. And then, of course, I think one of the catalysts was the occurrences on June 14th. Melissa and Mark Hortman were assassinated, and of course, there was the attempted assassination of my colleague, Senator Hoffman, and his wife, Yvette. And I think that it just created a sense of urgency. All of that happened off campus, but I think it did create a sense of urgency that we really need to focus in on our security here on the complex, not just for the members and the staff, but for the thousands and thousands of visitors who come here every year, including school children.
Absolutely. So I know that part of the review process included something called the Axtel report, and I think that that's a phrase we're going to become really familiar with by the end of this session. So what is it, and what did it find?
Sure. So the Axtel report was commissioned by the DPS, and they focused really on 4 buildings for the time being. We felt that these 4 buildings were probably the highest in terms of priority, and it was the Capitol itself, the Centennial Office Building where the House is currently temporarily located, the Judicial Center, and then of course the Minnesota Senate Building. And they did a very comprehensive security assessment that included field work, walking through physical observations of the physical plant, a lot of stakeholder engagement and conversations with people who are here on the complex. And they looked at really everything. And then they came up with both a public-facing executive summary, and then there was also a confidential 400-plus page analysis that went into more detail. That is private and confidential, and that part will not be released to the public just for obvious reasons. And so that really was, I would say, the cornerstone of the work that we did on the Advisory Committee for Capital Area Security.
And your advisory committee determined that weapons screening should be the #1 initiative, right? How did you guys make that determination?
So that actually came directly from the Axtel report. It was the #1 thing, and one of the challenges that the advisory committee has had in past years is they have made recommendations that go then to the governor and to the legislature, and it hasn't been funded. And so the advisory committee adopted the recommendations by the Axtel group. And the question was asked, if there was only one thing we could do, what would be the thing that would have the biggest impact? And they were unequivocal that it was weapons screening. And of course that prevents the introduction of weapons or other dangerous or harmful items before people ever actually enter the buildings. And so that creates kind of a perimeter of safety. I think it also probably makes things a little bit easier for our Capitol security team. If people are already screened, inside the building once people are in, I think it makes their job probably a little bit easier. Yeah.
Now that weapons screening was for those buildings that you mentioned. It's the perimeter of the Capitol grounds, but the Senate has taken its own steps to improve security, including banning guns in the gallery and on the floor. So talk to me about those extra steps.
Sure, and just to clarify, they're not banned on the floor. And we do, I think there are a number of members of the Senate who are permit to carry holders. I would say that for many members, after June 14th and then threats that have been received since that time, there is a vulnerability with the gallery that I think a lot of members felt. And based on that, President Champion was able to basically issue something that said we aren't going to permit guns there. The Senate has the capacity to make rules and control areas that are within our scope. So the Senate office building, our gallery, our floor, and it just was determined that in order for members to feel more comfortable being on the floor of the Senate, that people just don't need to bring guns up into the gallery.
Yeah. We know that you've mentioned there are some changes to security that the public can't know, just for those security reasons alone. And we mentioned some that they might see when they come, weapons screening at the doors and not being able to bring guns up into the gallery. What other changes might they see, or what do they need to know when they come here to the Capitol?
I think really the weapons screening is going to be the most visible thing. There are going to be single entry points on the south of the Capitol, kind of on the lower level, so it will be accessible. People will go through evolve machines, which are very similar. If anyone's been to a Twins game, they process people through those very, very quickly. If someone's flagged, they get pulled off to the side, they check them out, and then they continue their way. But you can move people through very, very quickly. The tunnel between the Capitol and the Senate office building has a machine. I checked it out today, walked over to the Capitol. It is staffed by very lovely people who are there to be friendly and helpful. People go through very easily. You just walk through, and it is a way to screen for dangerous weapons and other materials. They do have an X-ray machine, and so I think if somebody comes through, like for instance with a large bag, that would have to go through the X-ray machine. But this is the type of screening that people should be used to at this point. You go to see a play, you're going to go through some kind of screening. You go to a Twins game, you're going to go through screening. And this is just a way, again, to ensure the safety of everybody who comes to our Capitol.
Sure. So we've talked about how this is for the safety of visitors and staff, everybody that comes to the Capitol, which is something that people can get behind. But there has been some pushback and some unease with some of the proposed changes and the ones that have gone through. One of those arguments is that these things make the Capitol less accessible. So talk me through the considerations that you and your committee members, debated when it came to balancing security and access.
Sure. We are only one of about 10 states that did not do any screening. So we are an outlier. When you go to the U.S. Capitol, there's a rigorous screening you go through. When you go to 40 capitals around the states, around the country, you go through screening. And so I think the argument that somehow this impedes access is kind of a non-starter in terms of an argument. You will easily get through security, and once you're in, you can talk to anybody that you want to. This actually brings us into line really with the overwhelming majority of other states. And I'm of the opinion that if you are here to petition your government, I don't think you need to bring a gun to do that. We may have differing opinions about that, but again, many, many, many states screen for weapons and ban guns.
Yeah, I went to the Delaware Capitol and I've been to the Texas Capitol, and I went through screenings for both of those. If Texas can do it.
Yeah.
But that does lead us to another argument, is that there is concern about people's Second Amendment rights, their right to keep and bear arms. So how do you address those concerns?
So again, there are probably 6 states that don't have a weapons policy. And so we are, again, somewhat of an outlier. States like Tennessee, Alabama, West Virginia, I'm trying to think, Wisconsin, don't allow people to bring guns on their capitals. So this is not a blue state issue versus a red state issue. Red and blue states have decided that it is safer for everyone if people are not bringing firearms there. And I would just simply say the Supreme Court has held over and over again that there can be restrictions in sensitive areas, and government buildings, courthouses, and so forth have been determined in the past to be sensitive areas, and even the recent Bruin decision upheld that and stated that that is still the law of the land. And so people have a right to bear arms, but even Antonin Scalia said it's not an unlimited right, like most of our rights. We have a right to free speech, but it's not. There are some guardrails around that, and so this is no different.
Yeah, it's not absolute.
Correct.
Okay, well, let's talk about what happens next. Do these changes meet all of our security needs here at the Capitol, or do you think more is to come?
So our report actually had a number of categories of recommendations that have now gone to the legislature and the governor. There may be some things that will require legislative policy making. I will be introducing a bill to ban guns on the Capitol. As it stands right now, permit to carry holders will still be able to come to the Capitol with their firearms. They'll go through screening. They will have to show their permit. You can't bring long guns, and if you don't have a permit, you can't bring a gun. I just feel that we shouldn't have guns on the Capitol complex at all, and so I will be introducing that. But there are other things. There are things like more consistency in terms of staff access, badges. We now have encrypted badges. We're in the process of getting encrypted badges for everyone. But having more consistency between all of the different buildings in terms of what the badges look like and so on. So there are internal controls also. Once people are inside the building, visitors are inside the building, what kind of internal controls are we having? Are there places that are not accessible to the public, and how are we ensuring that? When employees leave their employment, how are we ensuring that they don't take their badge with them? I mean, so there are those sorts of things. There are technological advancements and things that we're looking at and have recommended as well. Also things like behavioral threat assessments. You know, we want people to have training so that they are observing the public as they're coming in, and maybe you know, assessing whether somebody is behaving in an unusual way that might raise some concerns. And so there are a variety of other things that really will be looked at, but not all of those things require legislative action, but they probably require money. And so this has been the other problem. The Advisory Committee on Capital Area Security has often made recommendations that have a price tag with them, and those recommendations have not been funded. So Department of Administration, I think, is asking for about $41 million. I don't know that we have the money, but again, either we're serious about security or we're not, and so I think we have to really address those things. But DPS also has that full non-public security report, and there are things and details in there that they could look at and implement, again, that don't require approval by the legislature.
Wow, well, a lot of things could be on the horizon. And thank you just for a great conversation, Senator. This has been great.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for your interest.
Among all of the other changes, 2 new faces have joined us in the Senate chamber this year. Senate DFLers welcomed Amanda Hemmingson-Yeager into their caucus over the interim. Senator Hemmingson-Yeager comes to us via a special election win in Senate District 47, which includes Woodbury and Maplewood.
I love the energy in here, and I know we're all excited to get to work, so I just wanted to say thank you.
And after winning Senate District 29's special election, Michael Holmstrom joins Senate Republicans. His district covers parts of Hennepin, Meeker, and Wright counties.
I will tirelessly work to ensure this office remains a strong, effective, and principled voice of the people.
When it comes to government spending, a lot of us have questions. Questions like, how and where were my tax dollars used? But tracking down the data to understand the entire budget can be time-consuming and frustrating, and that's where we come in. Dozens of summaries, graphs, and charts across hundreds of pages, working together to do just one thing.
Tell the people what happened.
Fiscal analyst Krista Boyd says the fiscal review is as simple as that.
It's like a one-stop shop of government spending.
The award-winning document, published by the nonpartisan Senate Council Research and Fiscal Analysis Office, plays an important role in government transparency, accountability, and accessibility.
It puts together the enacted budget, and it tries to do it in a nonpartisan manner. It shows the whole budget and it divides it up into different budget areas.
I think it can be extremely hard for the public and even members and even people who work here to access data that they need for a specific thing about the budget or what was spent or what was considered. It's really the only place that sums up everything that was done that year in the budget. Everything that was enacted that affects the state budget.
For example, if you want to know how much money was appropriated for ambulance service provider programs last session, turn to page 64. If you're curious as to how much money was set aside for the Department of Education's school unemployment aid, you can find that on page 39.
I believe this information is helpful because it's nice to see where we've been and why we've done it, and keep that in mind for where we're going.
And speaking of where we're going, the fiscal review is heading towards greater accessibility.
Currently, the document is structured to be a printed document. It is posted online as a PDF. We are looking ahead to the future, to what the future of the document might look like, and making it more of a web-based document, interactive, that people can click on different parts of it and not just have to pull up the whole document.
So that you can easily access the information you need to ask the right questions and make the right decisions for you, your loved ones, and your tax dollars. If you're interested in reading the fiscal review, you can find it on our website. That's senate.mn. It's on the Senate Council Research and Fiscal Analysis page under Publications. You can find fiscal reviews dating back to 1997 there. Now, this marks the review's 50th anniversary, so if you want to access those older documents going all the way back to 1975, you can find those on the Legislative Reference Library's website. Homeownership has long been seen as part of the American dream, but for some Minnesotans, it isn't a financial reality. I spoke with Senator Eric Lucero about his efforts to make home ownership more affordable across the state. Senator, thank you for being here. Now, today we're here to talk about affordable housing in Minnesota. And the Minnesota Housing just put out their annual Workforce and Affordable Home Ownership Development Program report. You are one of the senators they specifically mention in this report. So what is your connection to the program?
Well, myself, my own personal background, I am a real estate agent. And as such, I have a deep interest in home ownership and housing across the state of Minnesota. And I am a member of the Housing Committee in the Senate, and I'm also the Republican lead on that committee. So my relationship with the committee, with the agency, with this report is simply the working to get housing affordable for all people across the state of Minnesota.
I definitely think that's something that everybody can get behind for sure. Talk to me about this program specifically. What does it aim to do?
The enactment in statute reads, the purpose of the program is to increase the supply of workforce and affordable home-occupied multifamily and single-family housing throughout Minnesota. In other words, for people in single-family homes or multifamily homes that are going to be owner-occupied is working to make home ownership more affordable.
Okay. The report came out, you've seen it. What were your main takeaways from the report?
Well, the cost of housing in Minnesota continues to rise, whether it be for home ownership or for rental. And it's crushing family budgets across the state at all levels. And there was certainly progress made. I think there was 123 homes built across the state of Minnesota per this program, and that's a positive thing. However, that doesn't make a dent at all in the shortage, the true shortage that's happening in the supply of housing, the cost of housing that families are experiencing across the state. The reality is there is not enough government money, whether it be this program or similar programs, to solve this issue.
So what can we do then to either improve the program's efficiency to target the areas of need that we're seeing, or outside of the program, just generally make homeownership more affordable in Minnesota?
Well, there was a recent report put out by the Realtors Association that the average age now of first-time home buyers is 40 years old. And 2 years ago, the average age was 38 years old. And if you go back a decade or so ago, it was in the mid to late 20s was the average age. And so the metrics are trending in the wrong direction. And the question is why? Why is housing getting more expensive? One of the major contributing factors for that is government regulation. Government regulation makes it take longer to build houses, takes longer to get through permitting approval processes, and it takes longer and it's more expensive to implement and meet the ever-increasing requirements for code, which are some of the most stringent in Minnesota compared to the rest of the nation.
And I feel like we talked about this last session as well. So what impeded those ideas from, coming to fruition then? Because obviously it's an idea that everyone can get behind.
It should be. It should be a common sense examination and not be partisan at all. that when you look at the state of Minnesota compared to each of the surrounding states, to build a comparable home in Minnesota versus the surrounding states, it's anywhere between $50,000 and $150,000 more expensive to build the identical house in Minnesota, again, compared to our neighboring states. And these neighboring states, we have substantially similar workforce, we have substantially similar, obviously, weather and things like that. So there is no excuse other than the regulation in the state of Minnesota. So why hasn't there been progress? I think that there has been a greater interest by some to put more programs in place to try to have government intervene, when the reality is, just as we see with this report, 123 new homes, that's great. But that doesn't make a dent, and we can't keep looking to government for solutions. Instead, we need to have government roll back the hindrances that they're causing, which is driving up the price of housing.
Well, given that things are trending in the wrong direction, as you say, do you think there'll be an appetite for any of that kind of work this session, or what kind of timeline would we be looking at?
We have an incredibly short timeline this legislative session. From the time we gavel in until third deadline, which is when all legislation has to make its way through all committees, there's only 6 weeks. And so there's a lot of work to get done on a whole host of issues. It is going to be a challenge, no doubt. However, I'm going to be continuing to push for the rollback of some of these regulations to allow the free market to do what it does best, is build more supply. If we have more supply that meets the demand, that will help to drive down prices and make homeownership more affordable for all Minnesotans.
And just as a final thought, why don't you take me through why that is important? Because, you know, for people that live in rentals and things, they might not care as much, or younger people might not care as much about home ownership, but it's something that impacts the entire state, whether you own a home or not, right?
100%. So home ownership, it's the key to almost every other aspect of our life. We need to have stable housing because that influences how well we sleep. If we have stress, we have to have a place for our children to be able to come home to and have stability. It impacts their education. It impacts, again, the ability to find work with having a home to come home to every day. And it impacts everything about us. So one of the things that I recently heard was a podcast, and they were talking about the American dream. If we think about the American dream, it's often said, for decades, the American dream included becoming a homeowner. And in this podcast, they were talking about the frustration that some younger people are feeling, that it is changing the definition, the frustration and the inability to become a homeowner. Now, again, the average age being 40, it is actually altering the definition, and some in the younger generations are giving up. And they're saying they're going to be a perpetual renter, and they're changing their lifestyles accordingly. That, to me, is shocking, it's frustrating, and it shouldn't be. We shouldn't be in a place in this state or in this country where home ownership is so unattainable that people actually are giving up the hope of becoming a homeowner and instead settling to becoming a perpetual renter. That's why it's so important that we continue the cause of working as hard as we can to roll back government hindrances to provide that opportunity for everybody to become a homeowner.
Senator, great conversation. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
That's all the time we have today. Thank you for joining us, and see you next time.